Hey, What Next listener. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little bit later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
Want to teach your kids financial literacy, but not sure where to start? Greenlight can help. With Greenlight, parents can keep an eye on kids' spending and saving, while kids and teens use a card of their own to build money confidence. As a parent, you can send instant money transfers, set up chores, automate allowance, and more. It's a convenient way to run your household, customized to your family's needs, and the easy way to raise financially smart kids. Get started with Greenlight today and get your first month free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
Alex, have you ever seen a concession speech quite like the one Congresswoman Cori Bush gave last week?
Yeah, I don't think I have.
Alex Sammon writes about politics for Slate.
So this is the deal. First of all, I love you more.
It was something. Can you describe it?
Yeah, it was hot, I would say.
Pulling me away from my position as Congresswoman. All you did was take some of the strings off.
This speech is from last Tuesday night. You probably remember Cori Bush as a member of the Squad on Capitol Hill. She's progressive, and she's represented St. Louis, Missouri for the last 2 cycles. So this room is filled with supporters. As she talks, Bush paces the stage.
Let's be clear. Let's be clear. Let's be clear.
There's no I called my opponent to congratulate him and wish him the best.
Right. She says that the strings are off now, that she's effectively going to be uninhibited from this point forward. She says that she's been radicalized by the experience.
Whether I'm Congresswoman or not, I'm still taking care of my people. And so, because your side was so weak, you had to spend $19 million.
I mean, Cori Bush talks a lot about money in her speech. How much money was spent in her race?
It's huge. And it's not the most expensive congressional primary race of all time, but I think it's clearly in the top 5.
It's the source of this money that really bothers Cori Bush, because a lot of it came from one place, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC.
AIPAC, I'm coming to tear your kingdom down.
The thing is, Cori Bush isn't the first sitting legislator to be targeted by AIPAC. Just a few weeks back, New York Congressman Jamal Bowman was brought down too. And Alex says they're not going to be the last. So back in June, New York Magazine published this piece, and they said Jamal Bowman's loss was the start of a new era. The setup was basically that progressives had been dealt this really grievous blow, and they might not be able to recover from it. Given what just happened in Missouri, are we there?
I think that there's a pretty strong case to say that we're there. I mean, the building up of the Squad is this political formation of activist-friendly, principled progressives, totally funded by grassroots and small dollar donations and stuff like that. This whole vision for what left-wing representation could look like in Congress. And now they're taking big losses. Right now it's going backwards.
It's the revenge of big money.
It is. It really is. And it doesn't look very good to have a Republican-funded outside group come in with tens of millions of dollars in spending advantage and just buy off an election result. But that's the reality.
Today on the show, why congressional races are getting more expensive and the Squad is getting more vulnerable. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This show is brought to you by Public. If you are looking for simple yet sophisticated investing, Public.com says click on over and check them out. From stocks to options, bonds to crypto, it is all there. You can even earn an industry-leading 5.1% APY on your cash. Public is trusted by millions of investors, and NerdWallet just gave Public 4.6 stars and calls it an impressive experience. Sign up in 2 minutes at Public.com. All your investing in one place. This is a paid advertisement for Public Investing, 5.1% APY as of June 17th, 2024, and is subject to change. NerdWallet overall rating 4.6 out of 5 as of May 2024. Full disclosures in the podcast description.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, the supply chain has been a friend and foe to my company. Can AI make us more resilient? Signed, Supply Chained to Uncertainty.
Hey Supply, here's how AI in the supply chain can help. AI can massively automate data analytics and understand the movement of your goods. AI can point out weak links, market demand trends, optimal logistics, and other important aspects that impact the top and bottom lines for the business. Take the example of a large grocery chain that has hundreds of vendors spread through the country. In some cases, you may need to reroute shipments to other stores, such as in the case of fresh produce, a good that can go bad very fast. Managing such a supply chain is heavily dependent on the data provided, and AI can help optimize this information so that your supply chain works at its optimal levels.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
So, Alex, you and I have talked about AIPAC on this show before, and we've talked about how they've been targeting progressive members of Congress. But I guess for those who may be new here, can you just explain exactly what AIPAC is, how long it's been around, and why it's so important this election cycle?
So AIPAC has been around since the 60s. It's a pro-Israel lobbying group, right? It advocates for the Israeli government. It advocates for military aid to Israel and other sorts of aid. And for the vast majority of its lifespan, it's been basically that, right? It's a lobbying shop. It's very influential in Washington, D.C., and it's a pretty good fundraising group for members who are allied with it. But they also took a turn in terms of the way that they've acted as an organization in elections.
What did that turn look like?
So they started endorsing in races, which they didn't used to do.
So they're not just like going to Capitol Hill and being like, here's what we believe, and we'll support you if you help us achieve our goals. They're actually getting involved as members are making their case to voters.
Right. And they're picking their preferred players, basically. They're going into districts, basically, and they're putting their name on candidates, and they're saying, these are the guys we want, these are the guys we don't want.
When did it become clear that AIPAC was going to get very involved this cycle?
What's so interesting about this is that in 2022, they only went after open seats. In 2024, this cycle, they decided they were going to go after incumbents, which is sort of how we get to Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. It's one thing to go in a seat that's open and say, we're going to put our thumb on the scale for one candidate we like more. It's another thing to say, we're going to take this seat from someone who already has it. And it takes a lot more money to do that. And it takes a lot more conviction to do that.
Let's talk about what happened with Cori Bush. I guess I'll start here, which is Cori Bush, when she lost her primary, she was railing against AIPAC and saying the money they use is MAGA money. Is that fair? Is it fair to call this MAGA money?
I think, yes, at some level, yes. I've gone through the FEC filings for the largest donors to the super PAC that AIPAC uses. So this is going to be acronym heavy, but so AIPAC they have multiple super PACs, but the super PAC that they've spent the most out of this year is called United Democracy Project PAC. And it's the super PAC that they have used to spend in Democratic primaries. But you can look through the donors to that specific super PAC. And as you go down the list of the largest donors, you'll see that names on that list are not Democrats. Of the top 10 largest donors that I saw in those filings, there was one who gave regularly to Democrats and only to Democrats. Everyone else was either a massive Republican mega donor, a loyal Trump supporter mega donor, a Mitch McConnell mega donor. You know, we're talking about billionaires who have cast their lot with the Republican Party for cycles, sometimes for decades.
So that is notable because in Cori Bush's race, it was, of course, a Democratic primary. She was running against another Democrat, a guy named Wesley Bell, who's also made his name as a progressive Black Democrat. He was elected as the DA in Ferguson, where Mike Brown was killed a decade ago. Cori Bush also got into politics because of those protests and that killing. She was a nurse in the streets helping people. It just seems extra strange to me that these two would run against each other and that one of them would take money from an organization funded by Republicans.
Right. And there's a phone call that came out, I think a week ago or so, where Bell called Cori Bush, I think it was late last year, and said, "I'm not going to run against you. Don't worry. I am not going to run against you, and I will endorse you if you want me to." Then he turned around. He was running in a Senate primary. He drops out of that race. He declares that he's going to run against Cori Bush, and he accepts a massive amount of financial backing from a largely Republican-funded group.
So why was Cori Bush vulnerable to this kind of opponent, this kind of challenge?
She wasn't a great fundraiser. That actually is a funny thing about Cori Bush, is that despite having a high profile, she was not an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when it came to raising money.
It also seems to me like she had a few dings against her. Like she was being investigated by the DOJ for misuse of campaign funds. And I think you can argue about whether that was reasonable or not. Like I think the argument was she was using campaign funds to pay for security. Her now husband was one of her security people. There were these incidents like this where I think it left room for a question of competence, whether that was fair or not.
Right. I mean, that's exactly the thing, right? The question of like whether she should have been using that money to pay her now husband for security. If you're feeling charitable, you'd say, well, after the January 6th, the number of death threats and attempts to kill specifically, AOC and some of these very visible left-wing members, like that stuff is a real part of what those, especially those female members of Congress who are far to the left, live with. I mean, it's terrifying and it's a reality. On the other side, right, when you do things that open you up to criticism like that make it look like maybe you're not everything is above board, that ends up coming back to bite you. And when you're, a member of the squad, there are a lot of powerful forces in American politics that would prefer for you not to be in Congress. And so those little mistakes can be massive and decisive. And that didn't help.
Cori Bush wound up getting hammered by AIPAC on issues that had nothing to do with Israel. It's the same playbook the group used back in June when they went after Jamal Bowman, who lost his primary in New York. That fight wound up being the most expensive House race in history. And Alex says there is one attack AIPAC threw at both Bush and Bowman that was particularly disingenuous. The accusation that they refused to compromise with the president, especially on his 2021 infrastructure package.
Bowman voted against the president's Infrastructure Act, against rebuilding roads and bridges in New York, against replacing lead pipes.
The problem here is that Bush and Bowman did vote against this legislation, but only because it did not include Biden's full agenda. Things like childcare, universal pre-K, paid family leave.
When this election cycle comes up, by the way, 3 years later, not in the most immediate cycle after they took that vote, but a whole cycle after that, two of them lose their elections based on messaging that is totally predicated on misrepresenting this one vote that was done for the president, claiming that it was done to antagonize and undercut him. And that's, I think, why you see a lot of embitterment from Cori Bush on the stump. It's one thing to go down for something that you did. It's another thing to go down having tried to help out the party and then having that be misrepresented in such a profound way.
Okay, so here we are. Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush are both out in Congress, and AIPAC certainly spent a ton of money to make that happen. Is their record here 2 for 2? Like, has this organization really tried to unseat 2, gotten 2 out, or is it bigger than that?
It's bigger than that. It's bigger than that, and it is critically not 100%. It's not that they've won all of them. There was a race in California that they got really involved in, a House race and primary that they lost early on in the cycle despite spending millions of dollars. And that was a big surprise. So AIPAC will always claim, and if you look at their social media, they're constantly saying, we bat 1,000. We never lose. All of our candidates always win, and that's because our policy is good policy. Do they always win because of the money advantage? That's a good question. Do they always win? The answer, of course, is no.
After the break, when AIPAC loses. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. With BetterHelp, you can message a professional therapist anytime, anywhere. BetterHelp changes the way people approach their mental health and helps them tackle life's challenges by providing accessible and affordable care. Whenever there is anything that interferes with your happiness or prevents you from achieving your goals, they may be able to help. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/whatnext today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/whatnext. This show is brought to you by Discover. Have you heard about Doublenomics? It's okay if you haven't. It's extremely niche and practiced by Discover. Here's an example. Discover automatically doubles the cash back earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Can we talk about Ilhan Omar? Because she has a primary coming up tomorrow in Minnesota. She's facing a former city councilman, Don Samuels, someone who came in 2 points behind her in 2022.
Right.
Is this a real threat to her?
It seems like this time it's not.
Is Samuels funded by AIPAC?
They definitely didn't give him, the $20 million backstop that they gave to like George Latimer in New York 16th district to run against Jamal Bowman. So he's not one of their guys in that sense. But it's interesting that he's not, right? Because he ran really close, right? I mean, that's a critical thing, right? Is that, 2 points it's
close
in the margin of error, right? That's nothing. So you would have to say that Ilhan Omar would have seemed pretty vulnerable in this cycle. But the thing is that I think is critical is that what the Ilhan Omar race taught us from last time is that you can't not run a campaign. As an incumbent, that's not always been the case. You have to run an active campaign against a challenger. But that's sort of the new normal, I think, and especially for these progressives who come into the viewfinder of AIPAC. And so Omar this time has run a campaign, right? She's like spending money on ads. They're doing like, opposition research on Don Samuels. Like they didn't do that in 22 because they didn't take him seriously, because they didn't take this threat seriously. And now they're doing it. And so now the polling, there was a poll that came out that had her at like 59-40 over him. It doesn't seem like she's going to lose. And AIPAC probably has similar polling themselves.
I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is there are some candidates that are too big to fail. Some incumbents like AOC, like it's not worth taking her on for someone like AIPAC.
Yeah, right. For some of them, I mean, the funny thing is it's almost like it's hard to say anything categorical. Like AOC is a fundraising superstar, right? She brings in money like you wouldn't believe. You can't really beat her. She's just She's very good at the job, right? She's in the district all the time doing constituent services. She raises a ton of money. Very hard to beat her. That's one thing. Can you find a viable candidate, right? Like Summer Lee was lucky to be running against a sort of a very weak candidate, and they couldn't find anyone better. Rashida Tlaib had a similar thing where she's good at raising money. She's great at constituent services. AIPAC offered Hill Harper, who was running in the Michigan Senate race, sort of a similar dynamic to what happened in Missouri. He was running in the Michigan Senate race. AIPAC came to him and offered him $20 million to drop out of that race and run against Rashida.
Wow.
And he said no. That's sort of stuff that's happening, right? That's happening in the background. It's hard to know about these conversations, but like, what makes a candidate untouchable? It's like this combination of like fundraising, of constituent services, of endorsements. And I think that we're like figuring this out on the fly, right? I mean, I have looked at all these races pretty closely, and there are strategists who are actually involved in politics who know better than I do. And I think that they're trying to figure out too, like, what's the recipe here? Like, how do you survive a spending onslaught like that, or prevent one from happening?
So back in the fall, we had AIPAC coming out saying, we're going to spend $100 million to unseat every progressive member of Congress if we can. It's interesting to look now and see what's actually happening, because they are spending a lot of money. But it seems to me like they're looking out at the Congress people who are out there, and they're looking for weaker members of the herd.
Right.
Something I'm struggling with, though, is that I look at the leaders of the Democrats in Congress, like Hakeem Jeffries. He endorsed both Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. But Jeffries is also heavily supported by AIPAC. This seems like a conflict that no one is really saying out loud too much, which is that the Democrats have a problem on their hands here.
Right. Absolutely. Hakeem Jeffries, both of these races actually put him in a really interesting pinch, because Hakeem Jeffries loves incumbency, right? He loves protecting members of his caucus, and he has said and will say that that's like the single most important thing. It doesn't even matter if they vote against Democratic priorities, right? Like that's how far this logic goes. Like Democratic leadership has been willing to protect someone like Henry Cuellar, whose house got raided by the FBI, who, voted against the top Democratic priorities.
He was vocally opposed to abortion.
And yet, they went to great lengths to protect him when he was getting a primary challenge. Bush and Bowman are both in the Congressional Black Caucus, which also has very strong commitments to protecting its members. And Jeffries endorsed both of them. But after that, I think he gave Bowman like $7,000.
So he's quiet quitting on him.
I mean, it's hard not to feel like that, right? And it's exactly for the reason that you point out. It's like Jeffries is very close to AIPAC, and he has been for a long, long time. And, when he endorses these members, but then he didn't go to their district. He'd say like, I'm Hakeem Jeffries and I condemn these ads that misrepresent this legislative fight that I was part of. It's a really interesting tension in the fact that they're like shedding, obviously Wesley Bell is black and he's going to replace Cori Bush in the Black Caucus. But like in New York, Jamal Bowman is black and he is going to be replaced by a 71-year-old, white male freshman in George Latimer. And yet Jeffries didn't do much of anything to stop that. And he'll endorse, but that's it.
It seems to me like AIPAC is having some success in getting rid of a select few progressive people in Congress. But I wonder if it's having as much success silencing the message those people were transmitting, right?
Right.
Like, just last week, Kamala Harris held this rally in Detroit. People were just as ebullient as you've seen at any rally. But she was interrupted by pro-Palestine protesters. And it was just a reminder to me that in this rush of enthusiasm right now, total sugar rush in the Democratic Party, they still have issues to work out.
Right. Absolutely. You can spend all the money you want, but, public opinion on this stuff hasn't become more favorable to the Netanyahu government, right? I mean, ultimately this is about Israel policy, and AIPAC exists basically to boost the Netanyahu government standing. It hasn't gotten better for them in the eyes of Democratic voters, that's for sure. I mean, it's gotten worse, right? I mean, like, even Israelis don't like Netanyahu, right? So, like, it isn't working in that sense. Absolutely. It's not changing minds on the policy level, but it is knocking out members of Congress who represented those policies or gave voice to some of that stuff, and then ended up paying a pretty high price for it.
Alex Sammon, I'm super grateful for your time and your reporting. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Alex Sammon is a politics writer for Slate. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. We are led by Alicia Montgomery, with a little help from Susan Matthews. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.
If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, they offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.